God, when we start to understand things like that, like the true chemistry of what causes that to happen, like, oh, I just think it's you could change everything. What Pokemon Go did was they built gamification in a way that got people that were couch potatoes out walking around for 20 hours a day. We are in a global health crisis. Fundamentally, like let me just be 100% clear. People are spending less time outdoors. They're like kids in the US, urban and rural, are only spending 4 to 7 minutes a day outdoors.
This is a super interesting topic.
Yeah.
So basically, back in the day, you were building on the integrations from your side. So how was everyone building? Was it request based, HTTP based? How were they doing it, and how did you connect?
Everybody was different actually. I remember, I mean, and to be clear, like I'm not an engineer. So, like the reality is like I look at it very much from a product perspective, but many of the APIs, like, Sunto was different than TomTom, and TomTom was different than Garmin. I mean, everybody sort of had their own flavor of how they wanted to deliver and control that data, right? From an access perspective. I think that when Apple Health came along, there was some standardization that started to happen. Some, right? And I think Google sort of accelerated that a bit. But like I said, I mean, I couldn't tell you today what the model looks like. It was just back then, it was such a I don't know. I mean, it was just funny, like I just remember, like I said, that situation, walking into the office and just seeing everything red and asking the engineers, like, what's going on? They were like, we don't know. It's not on our side.
It's like it's still to this day, it's something similar. Things improved over time, but you see, great hardware companies are not necessarily good software companies.
Yeah, for sure.
So everybody comes and says, I'm going to build a system that is different than everybody else. And then you have a lot of companies that build request based. You have a lot of companies that build webhook based. You have a lot of companies building SDKs. So it's a mix and match when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
And then data, like someone says calories, someone says kilocalories, someone says something else. It's like the namings are all over the place.
Well, and even like on the time series, I mean, I remember there were people that would save in, 1 second increments, and people in 5, and people in like, it was all over the place. It was like there was no standard. So, I mean, I guess I'm not that encouraged to hear that there aren't any better standards today than there were, a decade ago. But yeah,
That's what we do. Like that's basically what Terra is, because we build a data standard. So you just speak to Terra and you speak to everyone straight away. That's one of the core issues that exist into this place.
Yeah.
Um,
What made you? I'm not that this is but I'm curious. What made you build the company?
Over time, I spent a lot of years buying wearables. I was from the days I was in the special forces and all that. I had wearables from the first Fitbit to the first Pebble to the first Nike and all that. And I love wearables, but I always had the same problem. Like my heart rate was just remaining in my Polar chest strap.
Yeah.
My workout was in my Garmin. Again, I was using MapMyFitness back in the day, and it's like all of my runs were there. And it's just impossible. It was impossible to connect all the data to any app. Like, what about Spotify? What about Netflix? What about any app that needed to access that information? And like, that's basically how I came to the realization. I was speaking with my co-founder that was in the same space as well, and then we just came into this. So it's basically personal need, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's what usually drives us, right, as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin, it's I started reading some of the things about your background, and I think if we tend to do a real breakdown of what you did in the past, we would need a 10-hour podcast. So I will try to make this fast.
Okay.
First, from the important bit, I read that you were a great cyclist. How did you start cycling?
Well, I was lucky that I grew up in Colorado because we had an event called the Red Zinger Mini Classic, which was for juniors, and it was the sort of the bigger for the elite riders. It was called the Red Zinger Classic that turned into the Coors Classic in the 80s. And so I was sort of fortunate that that was here in Colorado, and I was doing a little bit of skiing, and so it was sort of natural to train in the summers on the bike, and had some friends that were doing it. So I'd say it was a little bit social driven, but I was a good cyclist. I would say that I was, even my quote semi-professional career, I would say I was more of a bottle carrier and breakaway chaser than I was winning the races. I was a good cyclist in a time when I was in Europe from 90 to 94, and that was a very controversial time in the professional peloton, right? And what was happening.
Mm.
And so, like, for me, I feel very lucky that I had such an amazing experience in Europe. I speak 3 languages. I have friends that I speak to still to this day every month in Europe that are very, very close to. It was kind of like my college in some ways. It was sort of my like 4-year college experience. I joke about that a lot. But loved living in Switzerland. Lived 2 years of my life in Neuchâtel, and 2 years in Lugano, Switzerland, and just had such an amazing experience in Europe. But I was just, like I said, I was a good cyclist. I was not a great cyclist. And frankly, I was fortunate to get out of it in 94, before I think really things got very, very bad.
Mm.
And so I came back to the States. I still ride to this day. I mean, I still ride 7,000 miles a year. I mean, never really miss. I always have the same consistency.
Wow.
I love the bike. I love everything about it. I love being outdoors. It's funny. Eric Min's a friend of mine over at Zwift, and I joke that like I do indoor cycling, but like I don't love it. It's not like
Yep.
my thing. I love being outdoors. And so I came back to the States. I went to undergrad and graduate school in finance, and was fortunate. My first startup that I was part of was a company called Lipper that did mutual fund analytics, big data. And big data in the 90s was very different than how we talk about big data today. But
Mhm.
it was a super interesting company. I was employee number 35. And it was the first stock options that I got paid out on when Reuters bought us in 1998. And I was like, wow, this is how that works. Like, you get stock options and they hand you a big check. This is great. So it was sort of my first sort of fun experience in the startup world. And I had a great boss, Steve Lipper, who was the founder's son. And then I went to American Century in Kansas City a couple years, and then I went back to Reuters. And then when I founded MapMyFitness, I was at a company called Wellington Management in Boston. Um, so I was at Wellington, and I went on a cycling trip to Europe, to Switzerland in 2005. And we were sitting at this table at dinner, and somebody was like, "Oh, it'd be great if I could come to Switzerland and know these roads that you know, but without you being
Mm.
here." And I was like, I don't think that exists. I was like, it doesn't exist where I could create a map and then send it to you via a link. And then you could go ride that map. Like, and in the early days before the iPhone, we used to print PDFs in 4x4s. Like, we had these really nice PDFs, and you put them in your back cycling pocket or put them in your running
Ah.
pocket. So like we had, I don't know, the people were creating millions of maps on top of MapMy. I mean, before the iPhone. This was before iPhone. And so we were really lucky timing wise, just because it was a really good product at that time, built on Google Maps API. And my co-founder Kevin Callahan now works at Outside. He's the head of product at Outside. And we just had our timing was very good, because then we also built 2 of the first 100 iPhone apps. I mean, Map My Run and Map My Ride were apps number 98 and 99 in the store, or 100. And we just had good timing. I mean, we were in the store in July of 2008, and then we got featured by AT&T for one of the apps in November. And I mean, a little bit of it was a storybook. It was just up and to the right. I mean, it was just like downloads, users, everything. And so, I don't want to say the rest is history, but Kevin Plank came along from Under Armour. He was a big Map My Run user, loved the product. And he just called me and he was like, hey, do you want to sell the company?
Robin, before we jump into this, like if you were early, you launched early in the App Store. How did you think about it? Why did you launch it in the App Store back then?
Well, it was interesting. So we knew mobile was a pretty good use case for us. So we competed in this Google Android competition in December of 2007. We actually we took our team that was developing on the web and we started developing this Android app. I mean, actually, if you go to YouTube, you could still see the video of the app, the original MapMyFitness app. It's still on YouTube because that's where they had to submit the applications and the results. And so we knew it was a good use case. And we were sort of hanging out waiting for Google because we thought they were going to have an app store first. But then we
Mm.
realized that Apple was going to, and we just pivoted and built the iPhone app as quickly as we could to get
How
ready
did
for
you
that market.
realize that? Was it an announcement somewhere or?
There were all these like like I said, this contest with Android. There was all this like speculation going on in sort of the engineering community about like, well, what was going to happen and what were these apps like? What were these things? And were they like a new form of a website, like, or were they utilities? But our use case was great. It was like GPS, which by the way, the first GPSs on the phones were they were awful. They were, and we got blamed for everything. We got blamed for draining your battery. We got like MapMy got blamed for everything because people would leave them on in the background and go to work with their GPS on and stuff. I mean, it wasn't great, but it was you had music, you had the phone for safety, and you had the mapping, and it was just a great combination in our case, like our case from a user perspective. And so I think we just recognized that, and we were lucky because other than us and Runkeeper, there was no one else really. There was a couple of like walking apps, but they were like really not well done, and so we were very fortunate that we were kind of first.
And you were first, and did you mentioned AT&T helped? Did it help as well that you were first in the App Store from a distribution standpoint?
Oh yeah. Yeah, because we got featured by Apple and Google all the time. I mean, that like remember this was well before Strava or hundreds of other, running and cycling apps. So we would get featured all the time. I mean, like that AT&T ad that they ran because remember at the beginning AT&T had the exclusive distribution of the iPhone in the US and they ran that ad across every major publication in the US and we were one of the app icons on the ad. Like so it was like everybody was downloading MapMy. I mean it was just like so we'd have these weeks where we would do a million downloads in a week. And
Wow.
we were like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And our servers would break and everything would fall over and like we were like, "Okay, fix it. Everyone rush," like but it was great. I mean it was just very good timing.
And then you mentioned that you reached at a destination, and then Kevin from Under Armour reached out. But how did you decide to sell? What was the thinking process there?
Well, I always say there's only three decisions as an entrepreneur once you take capital. There's only three. There's not 20, there's not 40, there's three. You either go bust, just you go bankrupt because you run out of money and no one gives you more money. You either sell to a strategic or you go public. Like those are the only, like, I wish I could tell entrepreneurs there's like 20 other roads and paths and everything. There's just not. That's it. Like once you take institutional money. Like I know Next is an investor in you. Like you're done. Those are the three decisions. That's it. And then it's just a question of time. It's how quickly will that stuff happen? And I think what I realized about MapMy was like we were about 20 million in revenue, about 20 million users when Under Armour bought us. And I just realized like to build a public company, I mean, it was going to take at least another decade, which, by the way, if you look at where Strava is right now as a business, you'd argue they're still not ready to be public. They're getting closer, but like they're not ready yet, And so, how many apps? Look at Calm, look at Heads. They're not public yet.
From what perspective? Is it from a revenue standpoint or user standpoint?
I think it's a combination of scale, revenue, and sort of what I'd call stabilized earnings, like EBITDA or
Yeah.
your cash flow. Because you need, like, my view, public companies, if you're classified as like technology or growth or consumer, you need growth. You need like fundamental year over year growth. You need stability in your earnings so that you can prove to the street that you can manage and predict your business, right? So I just didn't feel like we were going to be able to get any of those things that easily. We were more of an ad business than we were a subscription business. We had started to build a subscription business and it was growing, but it wasn't fast enough that I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be 5 million paid members or, whatever. So, I mean, and Kevin offered me a great price and it changed my life. And I learned a ton from Kevin Blank. I mean, he's probably one of the best pure marketers in the world. Like, I just
Mm.
his ability to, like, the way he manages a brand is phenomenal. Like, I just learned so much from him when I was there.
What are like three things that you really remember from a marketing perspective that you learned?
Well, Kevin, you think about, when I got there, the company was about, I think we celebrated the $3 billion revenue mark when I was there.
Wow.
And he still really sweat the details. Like, even to this day, like, Kevin, he just, like, if it was an event, if it was a marketing campaign, if it was a product, right? Like, every single detail, like, it was like had to be perfect. And he would really, really push the teams to make sure that, it was just like that people would remember it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that the story was so clear. And then, just the way that he developed and described storytelling, like him as a storyteller, was just amazing. Like, his ability to draw the audience in and to create a narrative around what he was doing was incredible. And then I would just say, like, I think Kevin is really, really good on the marketing side at relationship building. I mean, he just so good at being interconnected with other humans, and I just think that was, I mean, to me, it was a huge learning. Like, it's not any one thing that makes
Mm.
your brand go, you know? And then product, I mean, I would add product. Like, he just was obsessed over stitching and where the laces were on the shoes, or I mean, he just thought of every where the logo was, how big the logo was, like every last detail for him was part of the story.
How did the culture, like, how was the culture in MapMy and how did it change when you went to Under Armour?
Yeah, I mean, our culture was very technology driven. I mean, we were constantly just iterating. Like, we didn't really care if something was going to break for the consumer. We just wanted to get it in front of the consumer. Like, we were just like, we have got to just get this feature in front of the consumer and see whether or not they love it, even if it doesn't work perfect. So I would say
Mm.
we were very agile, sort of consumer focused. Like, we would do this thing where Kevin and I would sit in the product meeting on with Chris Glodet, who was our chief product officer at MapMy at the time. We would sit in on Monday morning and we would go through the three, like, we would literally go through Zendesk, like, line by line. And we would pick three things that week we were going to develop that were totally customer driven, right? And we would do that every single week. Like, we just would go through methodically and just keep developing things that customers were saying were the most important thing. And so we were a very, I would say, customer and technology driven company. Under Armour, like, you gotta a couple things. One is, it was very much driven and built up out of league sports like baseball, basketball, football. I mean, definitely football. And they definitely were not they were an innovation company on the product side, but not a technology company. So,
Mm.
Kevin really pushed us to, like, we launched hardware. Like, we had this thing called Health Box that was a scale, a heart rate strap, and a wearable.
I bought it. I remember
Oh
it.
yeah, Healthbox. Yeah, Healthbox was my deal. That was the first real hardware I built. And then we had the connected shoe, Hover, which was, also a great product. I mean, it's still to this day, like, I think it's probably the best built integrated technology shoe that's on the market that just syncs with MapMy, automatically when you get home. You don't even need to take your phone, you know. So I think there was sort of a clash a little bit in that, but I also
Mm.
became very realistic that, like, one of the reasons why I don't really, I don't think I will sell outside to a strategic is that you forget in big companies, like when I was at Reuters or Wellington, or you forget that you're competing with resources with many, many other managers, leaders, right? Like, you are battling for, no, my thing's more important. No, my thing's more important. My thing's more, and that's very different than a small, startup that's got, like, I mean, I don't know, we have 350 people at outside, right? Like, it's very different. I'm not saying that people aren't competing for resources, but the scale of it is very different, right? So that was very challenging. And then I would just say that, you know the technology culture, I don't necessarily think merged very well with what I call a clothing company culture. Like, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean it was a little bit, there was friction for sure.
I think they're a bit of opposite as well, right? From a technology standpoint, engineering standpoint, you always want to do things as fast as possible based on user feedback, whereas a clothing company has an element of fashion into it. So you have to have the perfection element as well. So it's quite different there.
Yeah, and I think that that was very different. Um, I just think that there was a little bit of, like, if you don't grow up in a certain environment and then you try to just merge them together, I just think that it is challenging. I mean, look, I mean, I think that's true of outside now. I mean, we've done 22 acquisitions to build the company that we have. And, some have gone incredibly smooth, and CEOs and founders are still here and they're thriving, in our ecosystem, because they really understood the vision of where we wanted to get to. And others didn't last that long because they just didn't agree with kind of like what we are trying to build, right? And
Yeah.
I would say that I'm somewhat, I try not to listen to the noise. Like, if you go and, you look, and there's certainly criticism of outside and, like, us, rolling all these companies up and things, but I just have a very clear vision of what it is that we're trying to build. And, you can't diverge from that. You have to keep pushing for that. And again, within, like, you got to have enough money. You got to have all these things that eventually get you to that goal, because, otherwise you just run into a brick wall, right?
Yeah. So you built one of the most successful businesses here. Then you went, worked with Kevin in Under Armour. Then you built another company, which led to outside, which, from what I see from the outside of things, it's a very different way of doing business. So first of all, how did you approach? I've read a story that you spoke with the founder that you wanted to buy the company. How did this start? Like, why did you? What did you see in outside in the first place?
Well, I mean, part of it is the story of what happened at Under Armour. So, if you think about Under Armour, we bought 8 companies and merged them into Under Armour Connected Fitness, right? We own MyFitnessPal, which, again, another one of the probably the most successful companies in the category, right? Mike Lee
Yeah.
and Albert Lee, who built that. Great founders, great founders. I love those guys. They're amazing. Um, but so we tried to build this picture, like what I'd call the complete picture of sort of like health almost, right? Like your weight, your food intake, calorie intake, your output, your motion, your sleep, everything kind of in one ecosystem, which was called Under Armour Record, right? That was the product that Healthbox was integrated into.
By the way, I was one of the biggest fans back in the day.
Oh, I mean, Record
Um,
was Record. I mean, by the way, the wheel, the picture you saw when you went into the app. I mean,
yeah.
dude, that was all Kevin Plank. Like, Kevin and I and Chris Glade spent so many hours building that wheel. Like, I mean, it was just crazy. Oversimplified, complex. Anyway, that's a long story. But um, you know, what happened is that I believed Under Armour could have built $1 billion subscription business if they got into content, right? And that was
Mhm.
like in 2015, after we'd done all the acquisitions and Record was launched and hardware was launched. But I was sort of not convinced hardware was like the thing. I was not on the same page with Kevin about hardware. Okay. Even
How
though,
did you come to that realization?
well, I just felt like we needed something that brought people back to the platform more often. And I also saw these trends of what was happening in the industry of like Wayfair and commerce merging with content and things like that. I sort of saw this progression, right? And so I went to Kevin in 2015 and I said, "Hey, I think we could build $1 billion subscription business if we get into content." This was like the end of 2015. And Kevin just was like, "Man, I don't have. We've invested $1 billion in connected fitness. Like, I don't have any more money. Like, we can't put any more money into it, right?" So I basically was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take off because I don't see how we get to a really really stable business, which I thought was going to be around subscription versus hardware." Um, but Kevin was a product guy. He wanted the physicality of the health box, right? Like he wanted to touch it, feel it, see it in a store, like, and I understood that, but it just wasn't what I thought was going to make the big difference in the business. And so, after I left, I had a couple year non compete, went to run Helix, and then I was sort of like imagining like what would it look like
Mm.
if content was the core focus, was the thing that brought people back to the platform. And I was a 30-year subscriber to Velo News. I mean, I knew all these publications extremely well,
Mm.
but they were all super fragmented. It was really really fragmented. I kind of had this, like, there was all this fragmentation in the industry. I mean, tons of fragmentation. Like, every publication was standalone. They had no engineers. They had no first party data, no, not asking you to log in. They were still selling print at money losing like amounts. Like, print was losing money hand over fist in the industry, like across all print, right? Everywhere. Not everywhere. I mean, there's still some print magazines, like Outside Magazine is still making money, right? But like most of the print, the vertical prints were not doing that well. So I was just like, I think there's an opportunity to like put all these things together in a much more unified technology sort of like umbrella. And and so I bought the endurance publications first. So we bought Triathlete and Velo News and Women's Running and Podium Runner first, and then we bought Active Interest Media that owned things like Ski Magazine and Yoga Journal and Backpacker and Warren Miller Films. Then we bought a couple of other small publications. And then my mom lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I was there in 2020 during COVID, and I basically reached out to Larry Burke, who was the founder of Outside, and I said, "Look, if you ever sell Outside, I would love to talk to you." And he sort of blew me off a little bit. He was like, "Yeah, whatever, you little publications, like, I don't know what you're talking about." And then literally a year later to the day, he called me and he was like, "Hey, we're gonna sell the whole thing." Actually, sorry, it was 2019. He called me in November of 2020, and then we bought the publications in February of 2021.
There are a lot of learnings from an entrepreneurship standpoint here. First of all, how do you decide about who am I going to buy? And second, like, what's the like? Was this a negotiation tactic, or was this your way of bringing this forward?
In the content space, there are some models out there. Like you can look at Hearst and Condé Nast, and you can look at, I mean, I would even argue Disney, like what Iger did with Disney, with ESPN and Hulu, and like there were models out there. And I think that my pitch to these entrepreneurs, because most of them were like literally they were individuals that never had raised any capital or very little capital.
Mhm.
Um, on the media side, but they were too small of publications to go to some of the bigger players. Like, they just weren't big enough to go to a Condé or a Hearst. And so my pitch a little bit was like, let's bring it all together, and like, you will get equity in this company, and we have this shared vision of like the way the technology, single sign on, really getting more first party data, being digital first, getting a mobile app launched, integrating it all together. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs, like, you have to think a lot of them had been at it a very long time. I mean, to be clear, Larry Burke was the founder of Outside Magazine. He'd been doing it for 47 years, right? Like, that's a long time, man. Like no matter how you slice and dice it, right? So um, I think they believed that, and it was obviously a time where raising. I mean, when I started this whole thing, raising capital was pretty easy, right? I mean, it was I could call I don't know a dozen VCs, and they all would take my call and listen to the story and the pitch, so like it was raising capital was fairly easy. Um, so I think a little bit of it was like good timing. It was just like it was the right time in the market to do it. And a little bit of it was just selling the vision of what it is we wanted to build. Now, the other pieces, things like Gaia GPS and Trailforks and the event registration platform and photography platform, I think those were a little bit different because I had to sell them on a vision of integration, like how it would benefit their businesses to be part of something that was a much bigger ecosystem, right? And we're just starting to realize some of that stuff. I mean, we're 2 years into some of those acquisitions, and we're just starting to realize what this potentially could look like, right? And I think even a consumer, I think some of our consumers don't necessarily understand fully how it all is going to look together yet. So that's where I go back to you got to kind of just stick to your guns, or your guns is a bad term, but like you got to stick to your decisions on, like the framework that you're building and just really keep that pace.
So how much like what I'm listening to is that the way that you were pitching this to companies that you wanted to acquire was very similar to the way that you generally pitch investors. Like, what are the main differences, or is it the same?
No, I think it's very different. I mean,
Mm.
a founder to me has to believe that the outcome, not just for them, right? Like, not just for you as an individual, is better, right? But you have to believe that it's better for your entire team and your customers, right? You have to believe that the scale is better, the technology is going to be better, the marketing is going to be, you know what I mean? Like it's not, it's like, and then also as an entrepreneur, like you're one, you also have to realize that at some level it's like being purchased by a strategic and that you're giving up some part of the decision making process, right? Like it's no longer you making all the decisions. And I think so that part is very different than investors, because investors, you're basically just trying to, in my view, you're trying to convince them that your vision is going to make them money, right? Like, and that it's something that they can get behind and really support, right? So to me, that's very different. Entrepreneurs, like, it really is more of a like a partnership. Like we're getting married is not maybe the right term, but like we're getting into this bonded partnership that might, by the way, because you don't know when an IPO is, I mean, that partnership could be you and I. If you sold to outside, that partnership could be 20 years long. You don't know, right? Like, so that to me is a very different thing than investor. I mean, in my view, investors, unless that, like, we have a bunch of funds that like don't really have timelines. What I call timelines, it's more like it's but typically when you take VC money like Next, like you guys have 7 years with Next max. Like that's it. Like it's not like it's 20, it's not 30, it's 7 years. Like some decision has to be made in 7 years because of the way those funds work, right?
I also wanted to do a segue here because you mentioned it was easy to raise funds. So I wanted to expand a little bit on that in terms of how was it different from the first time that you raised money versus the time that you raised money from Onset? Like, what was different in your approach?
Well, I mean, I think I learned a lot. I mean, I probably pitched, I don't know, between Map My Helix and Under Armour, I've probably been in 1,000 pitches to investors. I'm no joke. I mean, I mean, so you curate your, you we just curate. It's like you curate the way and what you learn from all those. Because in every meeting, every time you're pitching, you're getting new feedback. It's like, oh, I never thought about that before, so maybe I should integrate that. So I I, I would say that certainly evolved. But I also just think like when you have had an outcome, when you have had the ability to have a sale and get to what an investor considers a finish line, a lot more investors take your call. I mean, it just, they don't just, I mean, one of the things I love about like DocuSend is like you send the presentation out to an investor who's like, yeah, I want to hear your story. And then they never open the deck. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not calling that person back because they didn't even have enough interest to get to slide two. Like they clearly don't believe in what it is I'm building. So, like, that's the other thing, too. I guess I would say, like in sales, any type of sales, I mean, you sell your APIs to, your connectivity to third parties. It's like you have to know when to move on. You have to know, like, this person right now, it's not their focus and I got to move on. I just got to go to the next person. Right. But I would just say I don't get, like, my optimism is, I mean, no one can get me down. Like I mean, no one. Like I could get hit in the face 5 times, I'd still get up and smile at you. You know what I mean? Like I just, and so I think you just have to have a lot of that when it comes to investors because so many will say no. So many.
Does it stem from cycling, maybe from your days in cycling?
I think a little bit, and as a kid, I mean, my mom was a single mom. We were incredibly. I mean, my mom, I don't think even when I was a kid ever made more than $25,000 a year. I mean, she was, working 3 jobs and barely getting by, and I think a little bit of it comes from my childhood. But I think a lot of it comes from cycling. I mean, in cycling, I mean, I joke I lost thousands of times in cycling. I mean, thousands. Like, my record is not even like, I love when Michael Jordan's like, oh, this is how many times I missed the ball, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's fair, but you also
But
hit
you
a
won.
lot, right? And got a lot of championships, But
Yeah,
I have no such palmaire.
that's crazy. It's basically a difficult upbringing, let's say. So you had the difficulty in the life that helped you um, never give up.
Yeah.
If we go back to outside, so you came up and said, let's build this subscription based and lock-in based media, maybe the biggest media company in our space, to be honest. um, and how did you approach it? So you acquired a few companies, but what are the steps? What do you do after you do that? I've seen one of the things that most of the websites have the same technology today. They have the same product experience today. How did you approach it in general?
Um, we, I mean, really, like, we knew we wanted to build single sign on. We knew that we want, like, so one of the things we had done at Under Armour was called single view of the customer, right? Like, we wanted to know what products they had purchased. We wanted to know how far they ran. We wanted to know how much they ate. Like, we wanted it all in one place so that we could actually, like, analyze that customer. And so, like, I knew with all these products, like, I wanted to do the same thing. Like, I wanted to know if you'd registered for an event and you used trail forks, and then you looked at 5 articles related to buying a new bicycle. Like, I wanted to bring all that together in one centralized way, right? Because I would argue, I mean, I don't know what your favorite outdoor thing is to do, but, like, I would argue that the friction that we go through as outdoor enthusiasts is still incredibly high. There's so many pieces of friction. Like, even registering for an event is still too hard. It's too many steps. It takes
Yeah.
you way too long, and you're like, God, do I really want to do the London Marathon that bad? Yes, I want to do the London Marathon that bad. Like, so it's this. But I just have always felt like, having been in the category for now 40 years. I mean, literally, I've been in and around outdoor activities for the majority of my life, right? I've always felt like the consumer experience could be way better. And I think that's what we're hoping to do at Outside, is, like, we're hoping to create a much more seamless experience for the consumer while bringing them more value, right? So we kind of use this wheel. We talk about, first, it's about inspiring people, like, and that's through the content and the Learn platform, and just interacting with all the things that we have, like the video, like watching Iron Man on TV, like, that's inspiring. Like, you're like, hey, maybe I should do an Iron Man, maybe I should do a 70.3. um and then the second step is like, okay, so in our category, like the thing I love about like what I call participatory sports, even though you're a fan, like I'm a fan of the Tour de France, right? Like I am. I watch it every year. My wife can't, like, I sit there for 4 hours in the morning working and watching the tour. You know, I'm a fan. But then the second I'm done being a fan, it's like I would just want to jump on my bike, right? Or if I watch World Cup skiing, I'm like, God, I really want to go skiing. That looks so much fun, right? Like I want to do that, right? So then for us, it's about how do we get them into that experience? How do we get them into from watching or listening or reading or whatever it is they're doing to, okay, now I want to go skiing. Now I want to go hiking. Now I want to go running. And that's what Gaia, Trailforks, the event registration platform is now I can put an event in front of you and I can say, hey, you just read this article about hiking in the, or running, a 10K. Here are 5 10Ks you can go do, right? So how do I get you from that point to that point? And then I think the biggest part that's missing from the industry that, frankly, we want to build is the reward side. Like you have to understand, like we are in a global health crisis. Fundamentally, like let me just be 100% clear. People are spending less time outdoors. They're like kids in the US, urban and rural, are only spending 4 to 7 minutes a day outdoors. That is a health crisis. That is a
That's insane.
it's insane, right? But because of screens and technology and like I hate the metaverse. I hate the idea of the metaverse, right? Because when we aren't connected to the planet, like we are part of the planet. You, me, everybody is part of the planet. When we are not connected to the planet, we stop caring about what happens to this planet. And by the way, like I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not getting off of this rock. Like I'm probably going to be here. My kids are probably going to be here. So we better figure it out because like it ain't getting any better. Like and so my view is like we're competing, you and me, our industry, our whole industry is competing with things that are drawing us into basically indoor time. So Zoom, video games, VR, social media, all of these things do not require that you go outdoors. You can sit there and desk scroll on Instagram for 12 hours and lose sleep and feel terrible and then wake up the next day and do it all over again. But you don't need any exercise to do that. Like your thumb probably is going to work for a while, right? And so I feel like we have to compete with mechanisms like the behavioral science behind getting you and I to desk scroll on Instagram is phenomenal science. Phenomenal. Like it's off the charts gamification reward mechanisms, right? Unfortunately, in fitness, we're not as good at building those things as the people that want to keep us indoors are. So I think we have to build things that essentially, and I'm not talking about Strava challenges. Like, I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. It's not. It's not creating a mechanism where we wake up every day going, I need to spend at least 2 hours a day outside, right? So, like, for me, that's what we at Outside are trying to build. We're trying to build something that it builds similar reward mechanisms to the most advanced technology in the market because I think this is what we're competing against. I'm not competing against Strava or Onyx or Ultra. Like I'm not competing with these other companies, North Face, whatever. Like we are competing against the what I would call the most detrimental sort of health stuff in the world, which is our our iPhones and our screens and our video games to me are devastating kids. Like they're these things are it's terrible for your brain. Terrible. I'm not there are good aspects of it. There are some good video games, but I would prefer that my kids spend 60 minutes outdoor than 60 minutes on Super Mario Brothers. Right?
Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, I was a kid and I was going every day outside and I was playing football every day. And all of the neighbors were outside playing football. And we spent like 6 hours every day, 7 hours every day. We're just leaving from school and just going outside playing. And we were just so happy.
I know. I know.
Like I see today what's going on, and everybody's in front of a screen, everybody's in front of a mobile phone, playing video games and all that. What you're saying makes so much sense. So what is the approach? Because basically what you're saying is that you're going against companies like TikTok, companies like Twitter, that basically have all the science behind them, um, playing with your dopamine all the times. Every single minute you wake up, you have to look at your phone just for that dopamine boost. So how can we reverse this?
Well, I think you have to play their game, and what I mean by that is we have to build technology that has strong enough reward mechanisms in it that gets that, you know, 12-year-old kid or 13-year-old kid to want to do something that rewards them for outdoor time versus for being in a video game. Or, and again, I think there's all kinds of tech. Like if you look at the history of fitness, right, there's all kinds of like gamified fitness apps, right? The problem is that the reward mechanisms aren't strong enough, right? Like, and by the way, as humans, as human is our inner being wants, like, we are at some level lazy. I know that's in some ways you go, well, that's a little counterintuitive, but I think as humans, we always try to take the simplest path, right? So the challenge with fitness is that it is hard, right? Like if you think about like riding a bike for 3 hours, right? Like, yeah, you can go slow, but the reality is like, it's not that easy, right? Sitting on your couch, desk scrolling is pretty easy, right? Like so I think we have to build things that are equivalent or better from a gamification perspective that are going to reward those things. And then we also need what I would call the intermediaries, the parents, the doctors. Like right now, as an example, I mean, you guys are probably seeing some of this too. Doctors in the UK, Singapore, and Canada are starting to issue and prescribe outdoor time because they know, as a first line of defense for a kid, that might be better than giving them some sort of antidepressant or some other medication, right? So I think we are going to thematically see that outdoor time and time in nature, like you might have read recently, there's all this stuff going on around a Japanese tradition of what they call forest bathing, which is not hard, actually. You just go sit in nature. You don't, it's not like you're talking about going out and playing soccer, football every day and things like that. Like I'm talking about literally going into the trees and just sitting there, right? That's pretty easy, right? But that it has a direct, like, it reduces hypertension, it reduces, like, all these physical things happen when you're in nature, even if you're just sitting there, like not hiking, not doing rock climbing or whatever. So I think we're going to see some push, but I think you need help from the intermediaries. I mean, you know I do wonder when it gets bad enough, the mental health crisis, because I think these things like Instagram and TikTok they're devastating for humans, like from a dopamine response and depression and all these things. I
Mm.
do wonder when the intermediaries are going to have to step in and actually ban these things, like from, or like restrict, like, here's one thing that easily the mobile phone companies could do, period, right? They could just literally restrict these apps to 1 hour a day. Could you imagine what would happen? I mean, the whole world would change overnight. If Android and iOS and Samsung just said, you cannot use the following social media apps more than 1 hour a day. Can you imagine? I mean, it would completely change the world overnight.
Mm.
But my point is, I think we have to counterbalance that, because I don't, unfortunately, think the intermediaries are going to get tough enough. And I think they
Yeah.
are. I think they are biased and incentivized to not do so. In other words, lobbying and where
Yeah.
dollars go and all this stuff. And so I think we have to build equivalent. And to some extent, I hope that those companies themselves invest and build. Like, Apple, obviously. I mean, we had Tim Cook on the cover of Outside Magazine, right? Because he wanted to talk about health, right? He wanted to talk about Apple in the health world, right? I mean, there's some irony, right? There's some irony. Like, we want to build the greatest health applications in the world, but the thing that we supply to the world is also killing you, right? Like, there's irony, right? Um, so, I think that's what we have to do is, as an industry, an outdoor and fitness industry, we have to build equivalent mechanisms that compete with these strong sort of forces that these other things do, and we have to continue pushing them in the hands of the next generation.
If the solution to this problem is are rewards, what rewards are you like? Can you give me some specifics of what rewards are you thinking right now for outside?
Well, we've talked a lot about providing experiences that you can only get, like giving people access to things like a World Cup skiing event, or VIP access to things like that. So I think there's experiential things. I think that there's monetary rewards. I think there are digital rewards. Certainly we explored for a while Web3 and kind of what I think is going to happen a little bit there. I think there are going to be things like that. But I would just say, like, if you think about the best video game, like, I always use this example of Niantic, right? With Pokemon Go. Okay.
Yeah.
When
Oh yeah.
when Pokemon Go launched, I was so impressed because what I felt like MapMy had done is we had democratized the technology of, like, GPS, like getting it into millions and millions of phones, right? Like, from a mapping and sort of fitness perspective. But I would argue largely all the people we had, and yes, there were new people, but I would say largely all the people we had were already, like, existing. They were already fitness people. Do you know what I mean? What Pokemon Go did was they built gamification in a way that got people that were couch potatoes out walking around for 20 hours a day. Literally, like, people just wandering the streets looking for creatures. And to me, that was so impressive. Like, I was like, this is the type of gamification that we need to get people physical, and you need to make it super fun and engaging and all of those things. And so I think we need a lot more Pokemon Goes, I guess, is my point.
So we have a lot of folks that are building on top of Terra. Something in the NFT space, for example. A lot of companies are trying to do something here, which is basically reward you for your activity. So there is so many companies that are trying to do that.
Yeah.
Pokemon Go was
Super
extremely good
successful.
at it.
Yeah. Billion
Yeah.
dollar business, billion dollar revenue business, right? Standalone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Robin, what's if you consider 5 years from now, where is outside going to be?
Well, I think we'll still have a big part of what I call the inspire part of the getting you inspired to want to go do this stuff. I think we'll do more in the activation side, and I think will have a rewards platform launched that is best in class for getting and rewarding. Like, I think about things like American Express rewards, or mileage on airlines. Like, people are addicted. Like, they do crazy things to finish up their miles at the end of the year. Like, you got people that will jump on a plane and go halfway around the world just to get to a next level, right? Like, they'll be like, oh, I gotta fly to Singapore from Tel Aviv because I got to get my million mile number this year, right? So, and then they use the credit card to get more miles and all of these things. And so I think in 5 years we will have built something that is equivalent to that.
And last one, Robin, I think wearables connect a lot with all of that. Like knowing where someone is, and tracking their movement, tracking their activity, tracking how many calories do they burn, tracking their health overall. Is there a combination you're thinking with outside when it comes to wearables? And what do you think is the future for wearables as well?
Well, I mean, I'm a huge wearables person. I mean, I use Aura religiously. I mean, obviously Garmin, Wahoo. I mean, you go through the list. I got every wearable. I mean, I got golf wearables. I got fitness wearable. I mean, I got it all. I think they're going to get lighter, more data integration. I do think wearables suffer from one of the things I love about Aura is just the simplicity, right? Like, just give me a number every day and, like, let it help guide my training or whatever it might be. Like, my readiness score if I had a bad night's sleep and my readiness score is like 40 or 50, I won't even ride the next day because I'm like, my body is telling me slow down, right? So I think that wearables need to stay as simplistic as possible. But I just think you're going to see it in everything. I think you're going to see it in clothing. I think you're going to see it in literally every possible thing you could imagine. I just think it's going to be everywhere, right? And so if you think about that, that means the data, and it's one of the reasons why I'm excited about AI too. Like, I think that data and proprietary data and like having that, compartmentalized and being able to build things off of it, I think is potentially one of the most interesting things that we have, I'm saying the world has coming, right? Because um, I do think as you can start to see this stuff as a consumer, like really simplistically, like once we have much better AI, and I would say we're getting there, but like I'm talking about like analyzing every part of my health. Like when I was at Helix, we were imagining a lot like blood, frequent blood, like doing quarterly blood reviews and genetic reviews and you biome biome reviews, like your gut biome. Like we envisioned, as all that came together, that like there was real insights, like, hey, you got to change your diet to XYZ. We know more about this because of what you put in your body and what how you feel, etc., what your markers look like. I think we're getting to a point where all of that is going to be like literally on a mobile app or in a screen, and it's just going to be much more fluid, like truly integrated personalized healthcare, right, in a way. And I think when that starts to happen, I do think there's a real shift. I think there's a real shift in the world. But um you know I just think we're probably like, that to me is the ultimate. It's like all of the data that you have, we have, everybody coming together in a way that fundamentally, as you wake up as a human, optimizes you in sort of real time, right? Like just almost predictive, like here's what you should eat for breakfast. Here's what workout you should do today based on where you're at and what times you have open. And, here's when you should get a blood test because we want to double check this thing that, looked like it was a bad marker 3 months ago. Like I think about, I don't know if you know this company Prenova, but it's like a 3D body scanning technology, right?
Hmm.
The output is phenomenal, right? Like, but there's not a lot of like action around it yet. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like, like, and what got you from 3 years ago's pre-novo scan to today, right? Like if something happened, like did I eat the wrong stuff? Did I not do this? Did I like all of that stuff is going to start to come together, right? In a very seamless way. And I think when it does, it's going to revolutionize health. It's pro, like we, like as a global society, I mean, some cultures are far better than others. We are a very reactive health system today, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's all going to change. I think it's going to be much more on the front end and proactive.
Yeah. So basically, more devices that is going to be in the form of your shirt, your shoes, your backpack if you go for hiking. So it's much more devices. Plus, I think the ones that are really exciting as well are all of these sensors that measure your glucose levels, your biomarkers. There you go.
I got one on right now, man.
Those are so exciting, like I'm looking forward. One, I'm looking forward to these ones, like what people are building on top of them.
Yeah.
And then what about testosterone? Like what about our hormones? Like when you look at this type of information, it's data that we measured all those times in a very static way versus dynamic, and now you can measure it dynamically, and it's like changing the way we're thinking, like, and actually that's the way you become predictive rather than reactive.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. Like that's what I mean is like the body is very complex, right? Like, we talk like in the cycling and running industry, we talk, think about like runner's high, right? Like when that happens, like whether it's on a bike or on skis or whatever, when that moment happens, it is a chemical reaction. It is a chemical reaction from everything, hormones, everything working perfectly at a moment, right? And God, when we start to understand things like that, like the true chemistry of what causes that to happen, like, oh, I just think it's you could change everything. I mean, you're going to break. I used to say this. I'm not kidding. I was talking about this a decade ago. That, in my opinion, that as all of this stuff starts to come together, like as we start to get all this data, that every single Olympic record is going to be broken, and not through doping, or I mean, I'm just saying from efficiency, from knowledge, right? Like, and like measuring chemicals and your gut biome and your all of these things. Every record is going to be broken. Every record. There's no question to me that humans are going to get more efficient through this technology, and that to me is what's coming.
Incredible. Robin, thank you so much.
Hey, great to spend some time with you.